please watch these two clips, and then I've got something else I'd like to show you.
December 14th, 2010. The place, a dangerous smuggling route in Arizona, not far from the border. A special tactical border squad was on patrol when gunfire broke out, and Agent Brian Terry, shown here in a training exercise, was killed. Kent is Brian's brother.
He was my only brother. That was the only brother I had, and I'm lost.
The assault rifles found at the murder, similar to these, were traced back to a U.S. gun shop. Where they came from and how they got there is a scandal so large, some insiders say it surpasses the shootout at Ruby Ridge and the deadly siege at Waco. To understand why, it helps to know something about Project Gunrunner, run by ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Project Gunrunner deployed new teams of agents to the southwest border. The idea, to stop the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Mexico's drug cartels. But in practice, sources tell CBS News, ATF's actions had the opposite result. They allegedly facilitated the delivery of thousands of guns into criminal hands. We wanted to ask ATF officials about the case, but they wouldn't agree to an interview. We were able to speak to 6 veteran ATF agents and executives involved. They don't want to be quoted by name for fear of retaliation. These are their allegations. In late 2009, ATF was alerted to suspicious buys at 7 gun shops in the Phoenix area. Suspicious because the buyers paid cash, sometimes brought in paper bags, and they purchased classic weapons of choice used by Mexican drug traffickers, semi-automatic versions of military-type rifles and pistols. Sources tell CBS News several gun shops wanted to stop the questionable sales, but ATF encouraged them to continue. Jaime Avila was one of the suspicious buyers. ATF put him in its suspect database in January 2010. For the next year, ATF watched as Avila and other suspects bought huge quantities of weapons, supposedly for personal use. They included 575 AK-47 type semi-automatic rifles. ATF managers allegedly made a controversial decision, allow most of the weapons on the streets. The idea was to get intelligence and see where they ended up. Insiders say it's a dangerous tactic called letting the guns walk. One agent called the strategy insane. Another said, "We were fully aware the guns would probably be moved across the border to drug cartels where they could be used to kill." On the phone, one Project Gunrunner source who didn't want to be identified told us just how many guns flooded the black market under ATF's watchful eye.
The numbers are over 2,500 on that case, by the way. That's how many guns were sold, including some 50 calibers that they let walk.
50 caliber weapons are fearsome. For months, ATF agents followed 50 caliber Barrett rifles and other guns believed headed for the Mexican border, but were ordered to let them go. One distraught agent was often overheard on ATF radios begging and pleading to be allowed to intercept transports. The answer, negative, stand down. CBS News has been told at least 11 ATF agents and senior managers voiced fierce opposition to the strategy. It got ugly, says one. There was screaming and yelling, says another. A third warned, "This is crazy. Somebody is going to get killed." Sure enough, the weapons soon began surfacing at crime scenes in Mexico, dozens of them, sources say, including shootouts with government officials. One agent argued with a superior asking, "Are you prepared to go to the funeral of a federal officer killed with one of these guns?" Another says, "Every time there was a shooting near the border, we would all hold our breath, hoping it wasn't one of our guns." Then Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered. These are the serial numbers on the 2 assault rifles found at the scene. They match 2 rifles ATF watched Jaime Avila buy in Phoenix nearly a year before. Officials won't answer whether the bullet that killed Terry came from one of those rifles, but the nightmare had come true. Walked guns turned up at a federal agent's murder. You feel like shit. You feel for the parents, one ATF veteran told us. Hours after Terry was gunned down, ATF finally arrested Avila. They've since indicted 34 suspected gun runners in the same group, but the indictment makes no mention of Terry's murder, and no one is charged in his death.
He'd want him to tell the truth, and that's one thing my brother didn't like, was a liar. And that's what he didn't want. He didn't want the truth.
In a letter, the Justice Department says the ATF has never knowingly allowed the sale of assault weapons to suspected gun runners. Cheryl Atkinson, CBS News, Washington.
When the government's so-called Fast and Furious program was created, the idea was to allow illegal guns to be shipped into Mexico so investigators could trace where they were going and get a better handle on where Mexico's criminal cartels were operating. But the program has been a disaster. The guns have been linked to killings of Mexican officials, and now it appears that Attorney General Eric Holder knew a lot more about it than he recently told Congress. Here's Cheryl Atkinson.
New documents obtained by CBS News show Attorney General Eric Holder was sent briefings on the controversial Fast and Furious operation as far back as July 2010. That directly contradicts his statement to Congress. Listen to what Holder told a Judiciary Committee hearing on May 3rd this year.
I'm not sure the exact date, but I probably heard about Fast and Furious for the first time over the last few weeks.
Yet internal Justice Department documents show that at least 10 months before that hearing, Holder began receiving frequent memos discussing Fast and Furious. They came from the head of the National Drug Intelligence Center and Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer. In Fast and Furious, ATF agents allegedly allowed thousands of weapons to cross the border and fall into the hands of Mexican drug cartels. It's called letting guns walk, and it remained secret to the public until Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered last December. 2 guns from Fast and Furious were found at the scene, and ATF agent John Dodson blew the whistle on the operation. Ever since, the Justice Department has publicly tried to distance itself. But the new documents leave no doubt that high-level justice officials knew guns were being walked. 2 Justice Department officials mulled it over in an email exchange October 18, 2010. It's a tricky case given the number of guns that have walked, but is a significant set of prosecution, says Jason Weinstein, Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division. Deputy Chief of the National Gang Unit, James Trusty, replies, "I'm not sure how much grief we get for guns walking. It may be more like, finally, they're going after people who sent the guns down there." Now, the Justice Department told CBS News that the officials in those emails were talking about an entirely different case started before Eric Holder became Attorney General. And tonight they tell CBS News Holder misunderstood that question from Congress, that he did know about Fast and Furious, just not the details. Bob.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl.
Well, did you notice the name change? Initially, in February, the news of this operation by ATF was called Project Gunrunner. During the spring and in the summer, the news stopped talking about Project Gunrunner and started talking about Operation Fast and Furious. But the first report said this happened under Project Gunrunner. Now the big blockbuster news came out over the weekend that Eric Holder had lied to Congress, that they have documents proving that he was informed of Operation Fast and Furious in July 2010. And then they allow him to spin it, saying that he misunderstood the question and that these documents are actually talking about a project that existed before Eric Holder was in office. Well, this administration loves to flaunt the truth right in your face. This is the United States Department of Justice website. And under Justice News, you can find this. It's remarks delivered by Eric Holder at the Mexico-United States Trafficking Conference that was held in Mexico on Thursday, April 2nd, 2009. More than a year before those memos in this weekend's blockbuster story were issued. And if we move down here, we'll see in these remarks that again were delivered in April 2009. Let's blow this up a little bit so you could be easier to see on your screen. Last week, our administration launched a major new effort to break the backs of the cartels. My department is committing 100 ATF personnel to the southwest border in the next 100 days to supplement our ongoing Project Gunrunner. That's right, Eric Holder knew about Project Gunrunner, not in July of 2010, as this blockbuster story of the weekend tells us, but prior to April of 2009. Thanks for listening.